The classroom was eerily quiet as Jake Hemsworth sat at the back of the lecture hall, his pencil hovering above a sketchpad. His gaze was fixed on the creature before him, its 8 limbs splayed out unnaturally, each tipped with serrated hooks that seemed designed more for dismembering than locomotion. The Class 4Z predator, known for its devastating efficiency as a hunter, was a marvel of nature, but its presence filled the room with an unsettling tension. Professor Eldritch stood at the front, his voice calm but unwavering as he explained the predator's background. Class 4Z specimens are classified as apex predators. This particular individual has been secured under multiple containment protocols to study its behavior and biology. I cannot stress this enough. Under no circumstances should you approach the specimen. Unauthorized movement within the perimeter will activate the auto-stasis field. Jake half listened. His mind, usually focused on sketches of alien creatures, was elsewhere, distracted by the atmosphere in the room. His tuna salad sandwich sat untouched on the desk, the smell of pickle brine mixing with the metallic scent of the sterile lab. The rest of the students were eerily silent, eyes glued to the massive predator contained within its force field. The predator's iridescent plates shimmered between violet and pitch black as the fluorescent lights above flickered in rhythm with the creature's subtle movements. Its twin eyes blinked independently, one trained on the ceiling, the other flicking from side to side, studying the air ducts as if anticipating a breach from above. Jake shivered, more from the quiet anticipation in the room than from fear of the creature itself. There was something oddly hypnotic about it, almost like the predator was observing them just as much as they were observing it. Jake's hand moved almost on its own, sketching the creature's hind leg, tracing the outline of its barbed tail. He was lost in the process, the rhythmic motion of his pencil a welcome distraction from the disquieting tension in the air. The predator's gaze flicked to him, its eyes narrowing just slightly, as if acknowledging his presence. The sharp hum of a containment drone snapping into position broke Jake from his trance. He blinked, realizing that time had slipped by unnoticed. The predator hadn't moved for the last 28 minutes. It was still, unnaturally still. But Jake wasn't fooled. He had spent enough time observing dangerous creatures back on Earth to know that stillness didn't always mean safety. Professor Eldritch was speaking again, but Jake wasn't paying attention anymore. The predator's unblinking gaze was fixed on him, and he felt a weird knot tighten in his chest. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the weight of the predator's stare heavier than any classroom lecture he had ever attended. "And what happens if the stasis field fails?" a voice asked casually from the back of the room, breaking the silence. It was a student who rarely spoke, a quiet Yelvexian with 3 eyes and translucent skin. The rest of the class turned to look at him, but Jake's gaze was still fixed on the creature. Professor Eldritch adjusted his glasses. "Then we proceed with standard academy lockdown protocol," he said, his voice a little colder. "Brace, do not run, and for your sake hope your body heat doesn't spike." A nervous chuckle rippled through the room, but Jake couldn't bring himself to laugh. His eyes never left the predator as it shifted ever so slightly, its tail flicking lazily, its attention still fixed on him. Suddenly there was a sharp, hollow click. The hum of the containment field disappeared. The room went still. Jake's heart skipped a beat as he realized what had happened. Professor Eldritch froze. "Do not move," he hissed. His hand was on the communicator at his belt, but his voice betrayed a hint of panic. "Central is being notified." Jake's hand had already moved instinctively toward his sketchpad. The pencil hovered above the paper again, but this time he wasn't thinking about the predator's anatomy. His heart raced, his eyes darting to the containment field. It was gone. The creature was free. The predator's eyes locked onto Jake, both of them now fully focused on him. He could feel its presence like an electric charge in the air, its every movement calculated, deliberate. The predator shifted slightly, and then it stretched. Jake's mind couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. It moved in a smooth, sinuous motion, its powerful limbs unfolding like a massive cat, muscles rippling beneath its sleek, armored hide. There was no sense of urgency, no sudden lunge. It simply stretched, unfurling its body with an almost deliberate grace that was terrifying in its casualness. The predator let out a soft, clicking noise, its tail flicking from side to side. It turned slowly and unnervingly and then walked toward Jake, each step measured and unbothered. The classroom erupted into chaos. Some students screamed. One fainted. The Yelvexian from the back of the room dry heaved into his boots, edging away from the unfolding scene. But Jake didn't move. His eyes were locked on the predator as it padded toward him, its tail high, its movements sleek and fluid. The creature stopped just in front of his desk. He could feel the heat radiating off of it, the subtle rumble of its body like a massive engine winding down. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Jake," Professor Eldritch said, his tone barely a whisper now, "do not make any sudden movements." Jake's pulse was pounding in his ears. He could smell the faint trace of the predator's scent in the air, a sharp, metallic tang mixed with something else, something primal. The creature sniffed at the air, its nostrils flaring. It circled his desk once, twice. Then it froze. It looked down at Jake's foot, and then it did something nobody could have predicted. It lowered itself, curling up beneath his desk, its massive body folding in on itself like an impossibly large cat. Jake's breath caught in his throat as the predator rested its armored chin on his boot. A low, rumbling purr filled the air, soft, almost contented. The room fell silent. Professor Eldritch's voice broke through the stillness. "Jake, can you?" Jake's voice came out in a hoarse whisper. "I think it likes me." Jake sat perfectly still, his mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. The class was still, the only sound in the room the low, rumbling purr of the predator beneath his desk. Its body was curled in an almost delicate fashion, the serrated hooks on its limbs resting lightly on the polished floor. There it was, the apex predator of Class 4Z, a creature that could tear through the toughest armor with a single swipe, lying on the ground beside him like a lazy cat in a sunbeam. But this wasn't a cat. This was a weapon, a living, breathing force of nature that had never shown any sign of mercy until now, and somehow it had chosen him. Jake felt the weight of the room on him, the eyes of his fellow students all fixed on him, wide with disbelief. He could almost hear their thoughts. Is he crazy? Why is it just sitting there? Does it know what it's doing? Professor Eldritch, who had been frozen in shock for a full minute, finally moved, his voice cutting through the silence. "Jake, you need to back away slowly," he said, though his words seemed almost mechanical. "We'll get security." Jake didn't move. He couldn't. The predator's large, glowing eyes were locked on him, its head resting against his boot as if claiming him as its own. It wasn't threatening him. It wasn't showing any signs of aggression at all. If anything, it looked relaxed. "Professor," Jake said, his voice hoarse from the shock, "I don't think it's going to attack me." Eldritch's gaze flicked from Jake to the creature beneath the desk, and then back to Jake. He seemed to hesitate, then nodded slowly, but his expression was one of deep concern. "Don't take this lightly, Jake. This creature is dangerous. It doesn't just let anyone get close." Jake swallowed hard, glancing down at the predator, which was still purring softly. He felt a strange warmth in his chest, a sense of connection that was as foreign as it was unsettling. I think it trusts me." The room was filled with muffled whispers now. Jake could feel the tension rising again, but it wasn't just fear. It was confusion. No one knew what to make of the scene unfolding before them. Not the students, not the faculty, and certainly not the security team that was now flooding into the room. Eldritch moved toward the door and motioned for two of the security guards to follow. "Stand back," he ordered. "I'll take care of this." The guards hesitated but obeyed, stepping back as Eldritch approached Jake and the predator. "Jake," Eldritch said quietly, "you need to let it go. It's not safe." Jake's gaze remained locked on the predator, which blinked slowly, as though waiting for him to make the next move. It was strange. Jake felt no fear, just a growing curiosity. What was it about him that had caused this creature to behave so differently? Why hadn't it attacked him like it had everyone else? Suddenly, the predator shifted, its body uncoiling like a giant serpent. Jake held his breath, but it didn't move to attack. Instead, it slowly raised its head, its eyes meeting his once more. It opened its mouth slightly, revealing rows of sharp teeth, teeth that could easily tear through metal. But it wasn't threatening him. It was sniffing him. Jake took a deep breath, feeling the heat of its breath on his leg. "It's just sniffing me," he whispered, almost to himself. His hand, almost without thinking, reached down toward the predator, his fingers hovering just above its sleek, iridescent skin. Eldritch watched, eyes wide with disbelief, but he didn't stop him. He knew Jake was probably right. It didn't seem like the predator was going to lash out. Still, he felt a surge of concern. "Jake, don't touch it, if it senses anything strange." But Jake was already reaching out. He felt the coolness of the creature's scales beneath his fingertips as they brushed against its side. To his surprise, it didn't jerk away or growl in warning. Instead, the predator leaned into his touch, almost as if purring. Professor Eldritch's voice cut through the stillness again. "Jake, that thing isn't just a predator. It's Class 4Z for a reason, if you provoke it." Jake shook his head, his fingers still gently resting on the predator's skin. "I'm not provoking it. I think it's letting me touch it." For a moment, everything was still. No one moved. The predator's purring grew softer, almost contented as it nuzzled Jake's boot. Then, without warning, the creature stretched again, its muscles rippling with an unsettling grace as it shifted slightly, curling back into the same position beneath the desk. "Okay," Jake murmured under his breath. "This is weird." The predator blinked slowly, its eyes never leaving Jake's. It seemed almost content. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. What had started as fear and chaos was now calm. Eldritch, still stunned, finally spoke up, his voice softer this time. "We need to get you out of here, Jake, now." "But why?" Jake asked, his voice shaky but resolute. "It's not going to hurt me." Eldritch stepped forward, his face a mask of concern. "That's not the point, Jake. It's not about whether it will hurt you or not. This creature is dangerous, you're dangerous, and so is this bond you think you have with it." Jake frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" Eldritch took a deep breath. Class 4Z predators are not known for forming bonds with humans, and when they do, it's usually because they've imprinted, and not in a healthy way. This creature, it's seeing you as something else, a provider, a pack leader. He paused, and that's a problem. Jake's mind raced. He had heard about the concept of imprinting in the context of animals, but this was different. He didn't want to be the predator's leader. He didn't even know what it meant for a creature like this to imprint on him. Before he could ask another question, the door to the classroom burst open. 2 security guards stood in the doorway, weapons raised. "Professor, the containment field has been restored," one of them said, glancing at the predator. "Do we need to initiate the lockdown procedure?" Eldritch nodded but turned to Jake, his voice low. "Jake, I need you to step away from it, please. We can't take any chances." The predator's ears twitched at the mention of the lockdown, its eyes narrowing. It growled softly, the rumble echoing through the room. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He could feel the tension building again, like a storm on the horizon. He could feel the predator's unease, its discomfort with the idea of being contained again. "I think it's scared," Jake said quietly, though he wasn't sure who he was talking to. The predator's growl grew louder, more insistent. Its muscles tensed beneath its shimmering hide. And Jake, though every part of him screamed to step away, stayed rooted to the spot, watching the creature with a mix of wonder and fear. The stillness in the room hung like a fragile thread, each breath drawn in by the class feeling somehow heavier than the last. Jake's pulse echoed in his ears as the predator's growl rumbled, a low, vibrating sound that felt almost like a warning. His eyes were fixed on the creature, the realization dawning on him that he wasn't just an observer here. He was a participant in something far bigger than any of them had imagined. Eldritch stepped forward, his face pale, but there was a hard edge to his voice now. "Jake, step away. You have to leave it alone." The 2 security guards behind Eldritch stood motionless, weapons ready but lowered, unsure of what to do. They had been trained for all sorts of contingencies, but this was unprecedented. A Class 4Z predator, an apex creature capable of slaughtering entire squads, had chosen to ignore its violent instincts and curl up beneath a human's desk. The predator's growl intensified, a sharp hiss-like sound escaping its fanged mouth as it lifted its head slightly, eyeing the guards. Its iridescent skin shimmered ominously in the dim light, and for a moment the room felt as though it were holding its collective breath. Jake stood frozen, but he could feel the predator's gaze on him, the strange bond between them becoming more tangible with each passing second. It wasn't just watching the guards, it was watching him. "Jake," Eldritch said, his voice cracking slightly with the strain of the moment. "This isn't a game. You need to move back, now." Jake didn't respond. His fingers, still trembling from the adrenaline, hovered over his sketchpad. It was as though he couldn't tear himself away, not from the predator and not from the strange connection they shared. He hadn't imagined it, he was sure of it now. The predator wasn't hostile. It wasn't attacking anyone, even though every instinct should have driven it to do so. It had chosen him, and in a strange way that terrified him. The predator's eyes narrowed, its tail flicking against the floor like a coiled spring. There was no denying that it was unsettled by the approaching guards. Jake knew that its patience was wearing thin. The predator wasn't a pet. It was a hunter, a killing machine. But it hadn't attacked. It had curled up under his desk, purring like it was a domesticated animal. And Jake was no expert on predators, but he had a feeling. A feeling that if he could just stay calm enough, the creature might not hurt anyone. Jake, the professor repeated more firmly this time. You don't understand. This thing could snap at any moment. It's only been docile because it hasn't been pushed. If you don't move back, we will have to. The door opened behind him with a soft hiss, cutting Eldritch off mid-sentence. It was Dr. Roland, the Academy's top xenobiologist, and his expression was one of grim curiosity. He was holding a datapad and wore a small, circular device on his wrist, a translator of sorts for communicating with non-humanoid species. Roland was one of the few people who had specialized knowledge of Class 4Z creatures, but even he seemed unsure of what to do in this situation. Professor, Dr. Roland said quietly, stepping into the room, is it imprinting? Eldritch looked at him, his brow furrowing in confusion and anxiety. Imprinting? It's a Class 4Z, Roland. It doesn't imprint, it kills. But if it's not attacking, Roland murmured, looking at the predator carefully. He then turned to Jake. You're sure it's not threatening you? Jake swallowed hard, but he nodded. The creature's gaze was still locked on him, but there was no malice in its eyes, only an unsettling calm. It seemed curious about him. I think it trusts me, Jake said, his voice barely a whisper. His throat felt dry as he tried to steady his breathing. It's not attacking me. It's not even showing any signs of aggression. I don't understand why, but it's not angry. Roland's eyes widened, and for a moment there was a flicker of something like surprise, or maybe even concern in his expression. Trust, he repeated, almost as if testing the word. Class 4Z predators don't trust anyone, especially not humans. I know, Jake said, his fingers still resting lightly on the predator's scaled body. It was warm, vibrating with the low purr that seemed to reverberate in his chest. But it's not attacking me, it's just watching. Professor Eldritch, who had been silent for a moment, suddenly stepped forward again. We need to do something, he said urgently. This is a danger. You're putting us all at risk by staying near it. Jake shook his head, his feet remaining planted firmly on the floor. I'm not leaving, I can't. The predator's ears twitched, then it blinked at Jake, its gaze softening ever so slightly. It moved a little closer, nudging his boot with the side of its massive head. The room went silent again, and it felt like time itself had stopped. The predator trusted him. The realization was overwhelming. No one had ever believed this could happen. A Class 4Z predator, the kind of creature that had been bred and conditioned to be nothing less than the apex of alien predatory species, had decided that Jake was its point of trust. This is insane, muttered Eldritch, running a hand over his face. We can't just let it stay here. Jake's heart pounded, but he was unwavering. He didn't want to make the predator angry, but he didn't want to leave it alone either. There was something here, something undeniable, that made him feel that if he left, the predator would see it as a betrayal. Suddenly, the predator shifted, moving with startling speed and grace. Jake barely had time to react before the creature was on its feet, its head craned upward toward the ceiling. The air in the room seemed to grow thick with tension, and the predator's tail flicked, rattling the walls with an audible thud. It wasn't just watching Jake anymore. It was watching the entire room. And then, in a surprising move, it stepped forward, its large frame advancing toward the door where the security guard stood. Jake, get back, Eldritch ordered. We need to restrain it now. Jake didn't move, his eyes fixed on the predator. The creature looked back at him, its eyes narrowing with some unknown expression, as if deciding whether or not to listen. The predator turned back to the guards, its body low to the ground, its tail raised like a weapon. But Jake held his breath, watching it. The predator stopped, as if considering something, and then slowly, almost reluctantly, its posture softened. It turned back to Jake, and then, with an unexpected ease, it lowered itself once more to the ground, curling back into its previous position beneath his desk. There was a collective exhale in the room. No one had expected that. Roland looked at Jake, his expression a mix of disbelief and intrigue. It's responding to you. I've never seen anything like this before. Jake swallowed, his heart still pounding. I don't understand, he murmured, staring at the predator. But I think it's just scared. It doesn't want to hurt anyone. Eldritch let out a sharp sigh. I'm afraid it's not that simple, Jake. The heavy footfalls outside the room grew louder, their metallic echo shaking the floor beneath Jake's feet. He glanced toward the door, then back at the predator, which was still curled under the desk, its massive head resting against his boot. Its tail twitched restlessly, the thick, barbed end flicking in time with the rising tension. Jake's heartbeat was a steady drum in his ears, drowned out only by the low growl the predator emitted every few seconds. Jake didn't dare move. The atmosphere in the room was thick with uncertainty. Everyone could feel it. The predator was on edge, and so were the security forces. The predator wasn't just an animal, it was a force of nature, a machine built for destruction. And here Jake was, standing right in the middle of it, somehow trusted by this apex hunter. I told you it wouldn't be this easy, Eldritch said under his breath, his hand still resting on the doorframe, his eyes darting between Jake and the growing presence outside. If the predator won't leave, we'll have to force it, and I don't know how much longer that field will hold. Professor, Jake said, voice low, his fingers still trembling from the adrenaline. It's not going to hurt anyone. Eldritch shot him a sharp glance. Jake, it's a predator. It's been trained to hunt, to kill. The fact that it's not attacking you only makes it more dangerous. This creature doesn't know compassion, it only knows survival. And right now, it's trying to protect you. Jake flinched, the weight of the professor's words sinking deep into his gut. He had never seen an apex predator act like this, not even in the wildest species back home on Earth. And yet, here it was, choosing him over its natural instincts. The door outside clicked again, and Jake heard the unmistakable sound of more boots, heavier now, more guards, and likely with higher clearance. Eldritch was right. The longer the predator stayed out of containment, the more likely it was to be subdued or worse, killed. But Jake wasn't ready for that. The bond, whatever it was, couldn't be ignored. The predator had chosen him, and Jake had no idea what kind of power that connection might hold. What do you want me to do, then? Jake's voice was calm now, though it still held a trace of fear. He stood up, glancing at the door and then back at the predator. Should I just let them take it? Should I let them lock it up again? Eldritch seemed to hesitate, looking from Jake to the predator. He knew that trying to contain it again could be disastrous, but he also knew that Jake was still in grave danger. No one on this campus had the training or the knowledge to deal with a creature like this on their own. Jake, Eldritch said carefully, taking a deep breath. You're not in control here, no one is. If this bond is what we think it is, then you need to get out of here. We'll handle the rest. But Jake didn't want to leave, not yet. The predator, sensing his hesitation, made a soft, churring noise from beneath the desk. It was quieter this time, more like a request than a command. Jake felt a shiver run through his spine. He couldn't explain it, but somehow in that moment he understood. The predator wanted him to stay. Professor, Jake said, his voice steady now with more resolve. I'm not going anywhere. Eldritch's eyes widened, but before he could respond, the door suddenly slammed open, cutting through the tension like a knife. A group of heavily armored guards poured into the room, their weapons raised, ready to subdue the predator. The sight of them was enough to make the air feel thicker, more dangerous. Jake instinctively stepped in front of the desk, his body now between the predator and the guards. He didn't even know why. But the bond he felt was real, and the thought of the creature being attacked again was more than he could bear. You've got to be kidding me, one of the guards muttered, seeing Jake stand his ground. Step aside, another barked, his voice cold and commanding. We have orders to contain the predator now. Jake didn't move. No, you're not going to hurt it. The guards paused, exchanging glances. One of them took a step forward, clearly frustrated. Kid, this isn't a negotiation. That thing could kill you with one swipe. Get out of the way. But Jake held firm. He couldn't explain it. His body just knew he had to protect the predator. It was no longer just an animal in a cage. It was his responsibility. The predator had imprinted on him, whether anyone else understood it or not, and he wasn't about to let anyone harm it. The predator, sensing the growing conflict, let out a low growl, this time more intense, more menacing. Its body shifted and its tail swished, making a soft but menacing thud against the floor. Jake could feel the air grow heavier, charged with the tension of the moment. The guard who had moved closest to Jake stopped, looking at the predator in a mixture of awe and fear. It was clear. The predator had no intentions of backing down. Jake, Eldritch's voice was quieter now, a tinge of desperation creeping in. You have to let them do their job. We can't afford to make things worse. The whole academy is at risk. The predator is a danger to everyone here. Don't you see that? Jake hesitated, the weight of Eldritch's words pressing down on him. He knew the predator was dangerous. It wasn't just a domesticated pet. It had the power to tear through walls, to maim and kill without effort. But in the time he had spent with it, Jake had seen something else. Something no one else had. The predator was no longer just a weapon. It was alive. It was thinking. And whatever bond they shared, however strange, had to mean something. "You can't contain it again," Jake said firmly. "It won't let you." At that moment, something unexpected happened. The predator's massive head turned toward the door, and its eyes fixed on the guards with chilling clarity. It growled again, louder this time, more aggressive. "Jake," Eldritch said urgently, "move." But before Jake could respond, the predator surged forward. It moved with incredible speed, faster than Jake had ever seen it move before. The guards didn't have time to react. Before they could even raise their weapons, the predator was upon them. The room erupted into chaos. One guard tried to fire a stun gun, but the predator swatted the projectile aside with a single, powerful swipe of its tail. Another attempted to flank it, but the predator spun, its claws flashing in a blur of motion, striking the floor with a force that sent vibrations through the entire room. "Get down," Eldritch shouted, ducking behind the nearest desk as the predator moved like lightning, its powerful limbs taking down any who tried to approach. Jake stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The predator had only one goal, to protect him, and in doing so, it was now a force of destruction. The classroom was in utter chaos. The predator, now fully unleashed, moved like a blur, its claws flashing in the low light as it sliced through the air with terrifying precision. Jake was still frozen in place, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear. The sheer force of the predator's movement had sent the guards scrambling for cover, but it wasn't the guards the creature cared about. It was him, Jake. The predator, its iridescent skin shimmering like liquid glass, glared at anyone who dared approach. The guards attempted to contain it, but they had underestimated its power, and they were now paying the price for their mistake. One guard lunged forward, his stun gun aimed directly at the predator's chest. In a split second, the creature's tail lashed out with lightning speed, swatting the weapon away before sending the guard crashing into the far wall. The room reverberated with the impact, the guard crumpling to the floor in a heap. Get back," someone yelled, but their voice was lost in the roar of the predator's growl. The remaining guards had regrouped, weapons raised, but they were no match for the sheer ferocity of the creature before them. Jake blinked, his senses slowly coming back to him. He couldn't just stand there anymore. The predator was only attacking to protect him, but if it kept this up, it would be a massacre. His first instinct was to run, but his body wouldn't cooperate. The predator's growl intensified, and Jake felt his legs lock in place. It had to be him. He was the only one who could stop this. "Stop!" Jake shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. He stepped forward, his hands held out in front of him as if to show the predator he meant no harm. But the creature didn't stop. Instead, its glowing eyes shifted to him, the massive head tilting slightly as if evaluating him. "Jake, what are you doing?" Eldritch screamed from behind a desk. He had taken cover when the predator began to tear through the guards, but now he was looking at Jake like he was insane. "You need to move, now." Jake didn't move. He couldn't. The predator was looking at him with an almost pleading expression, like it was waiting for him to do something, anything. The chaos in the room continued to escalate as the remaining guards struggled to regain control, but Jake didn't look away from the predator's eyes. There had to be a way to end this without more bloodshed. Then a low, rumbling noise broke through the tension, faint at first but growing louder by the second. It was coming from the walls, no, the floors, the hum of a lockdown protocol. "Jake," Eldritch said, his voice cracking, "the perimeter," about to be sealed. "You have seconds before they lock this room down completely." Jake's heart raced. There was no way he could get out of this without confronting everything. The predator would be trapped again, just like before, and it would be worse this time. They would kill it. "No," Jake shouted, panic seizing him. He didn't know what he was doing, but he couldn't let the predator suffer again. He ran toward the door, heading straight for the control panel. As he reached it, the predator let out another low, guttural growl, and the heavy door slammed shut, sealing off the only escape. Without thinking, Jake pressed a few buttons, desperately trying to disable the lockdown. The predator's eyes locked onto his, and something in its gaze shifted. It wasn't just reacting to the chaos, it was reacting to him. There was no fear in its eyes, just a deep, unwavering trust. It needed him to do something. The door behind him whined and clanked as it began to lower. The predator made its move, its tail whipping through the air with devastating speed. One of the remaining guards attempted to fire a stun blast, but the predator was faster. Its tail snapped out and knocked the weapon aside like it was nothing more than a toy. And then it did something Jake wasn't prepared for. With a powerful lunge, the predator charged toward the door, its massive body surging forward. Jake's breath caught in his throat as the creature, in a move that defied everything he knew about its biology, broke through the reinforced walls. The impact was deafening as the creature's claws scraped across the metal, creating a jagged opening large enough for it to fit through. "What the hell?" Eldritch shouted, his eyes wide with disbelief. Jake didn't have time to think. The predator had made its choice. It was getting out, and if Jake didn't follow, it would leave him behind. But Jake couldn't let that happen. He sprinted after the predator, the sound of alarms filling the air as he followed the creature's path. The corridor outside was dark and narrow, a maze of concrete and steel. But Jake didn't need to see where he was going. He just followed the sound of the predator's footsteps, the growls echoing off the walls. They were no longer in the safety of the campus. They were outside, running free. The predator's movements were fluid and fast. Jake could barely keep up, but he knew he had to. If he stopped now, the predator might think he was abandoning it, and there was no way in hell Jake was going to let that happen. They turned a corner, and Jake's heart nearly stopped. Ahead of them, a group of heavily armed security forces stood at the end of the hallway, blocking the only exit. There was no way around them, no way through without a fight. Jake's mind raced, trying to think of something, anything, that could stop this. But the predator was already ahead of him, its body coiling like a spring. Its eyes fixed on the security forces, calculating. The guards raised their weapons, preparing for a standoff, but Jake could see the hesitation in their movements. They had no idea how to deal with this situation. The predator was unpredictable, and that made it dangerous. Without warning, the predator sprang into action. Its body blurred as it moved forward, its claws slashing through the air with deadly precision. The guards tried to respond, but the predator was too fast. One of them fell, his weapon clattering to the ground as the predator's tail whipped around, knocking him out cold. "No," Jake shouted, running forward. "Stop, don't hurt them." But the predator didn't stop. It was relentless. It was protecting Jake, but it was also protecting itself. And that meant the guards were caught in the middle. Jake's heart pounded as he reached the front of the group, pushing through the chaos. He could barely hear his own thoughts over the roar of gunfire and the predator's growls. There was no choice now. They were trapped in a fight for survival. Jake's heart hammered in his chest as the predator's claws raked the floor, sending sparks flying. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a battle for control. The creature had snapped into full predator mode, its instincts overwhelming the bond it had formed with Jake. And as much as he wanted to believe the predator would protect him, Jake knew that it wasn't thinking about anything but survival now. It was too far gone. "No," Jake shouted again, desperately pulling on the predator's tail, his hands slick with sweat. "Stop, we don't have to do this." The predator growled low in its throat, its claws scraping against the metal floor as it tried to twist free. Jake's body was pressed against its sleek, iridescent side, his heart thundering in his chest. He had never felt so powerless. The security guards were closing in, their weapons drawn and aimed directly at the predator. They had seen enough. This creature was a threat, and they wouldn't hesitate to take it down, no matter what it took. One guard stepped forward, his voice shaky but resolute. "Jake, step aside. We'll deal with it." But Jake refused to move. He wasn't going to let them kill it. Not after everything they had been through together. There had to be another way. There had to be something he could do to stop this madness. The predator's tail whipped around suddenly, knocking Jake off his feet and sending him crashing to the floor. The impact stole his breath, and for a moment he couldn't move. He heard the shouts of the guards, but his focus was entirely on the predator, which was now preparing to strike again. "Jake," Eldritch's voice cut through the noise, but it was barely audible over the chaos. "Get away from it. This is too dangerous." Jake struggled to his feet, ignoring the pain in his side. He had to act quickly, or the situation would escalate beyond control. He saw the predator's eyes, the same eyes that had been so calm just hours ago. Now they were cold, focused only on the guards. It was no longer his predator. It was just a wild animal, a weapon designed to survive at any cost. But it was more than that. It was his responsibility, and he couldn't abandon it now. "Please," Jake whispered, his voice strained. "I'm not leaving you, don't make me do this." For a moment the predator paused. Its tail quivered, its claws sinking into the floor as it lowered its stance, eyes flicking from Jake to the approaching guards. And in that moment Jake saw something, a flicker of recognition. The predator wasn't just fighting for its survival anymore. It had made a choice just like Jake had. Eldritch was still shouting at him from behind the guards, urging him to move. But Jake didn't move. He couldn't. He wasn't just fighting for his life now, he was fighting for the creature that had imprinted on him. The creature that had trusted him. The predator turned its head slightly, meeting Jake's gaze. It wasn't angry anymore. It wasn't out of control. It was waiting for Jake to make the final choice. Jake took a slow breath, his eyes locked on the predator. He could feel it, its presence, its power, its raw potential. But more than that, he felt its vulnerability. He wasn't just a human in its path anymore. He was something else, a partner, a protector. "Please," Jake said again, this time with more conviction. "I know you don't want this, but I can't let them hurt you." The predator's tail twitched, then slowly it relaxed. Its growl softened into a low, rumbling purr as it sat back on its haunches, the tension in its body easing. The guards didn't lower their weapons. They couldn't, but Jake could see the hesitation in their eyes. They were waiting for an order, waiting for someone to give them the green light to fire. But that wasn't the answer. It never was. Jake stood tall, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his insides. "If you want to fire, then fire. But know this, you're not dealing with a creature anymore. You're dealing with me." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their meaning. For a moment, no one moved. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, frozen in time. The predator's eyes were still fixed on Jake, watching him closely, as if waiting for his next move. "Jake," Eldritch's voice broke the silence, softer now. He was pleading with Jake, but Jake could see the resignation in his eyes. He wasn't asking him to step aside anymore. He was asking him to survive. "You can't protect it forever." Jake looked around at the tense faces of the guards, then back at the predator. There was no going back now. The predator had chosen him, and despite everything, Jake had made his choice too. "I'm not going to let you hurt it," Jake said firmly. "You can take me, you can try to take us, but you'll have to go through me first." The guards exchanged uneasy glances, the conflict playing out in the air between them. But they were bound by duty, and their hesitation was fleeting. They took a step forward, ready to take Jake down if it meant controlling the predator. And then it happened. The predator growled once more, the sound like a distant thunderclap reverberating through the room. Its muscles coiled, ready for another strike. But instead of lashing out, it stepped forward, positioning itself between Jake and the guards. Its stance was defensive. It wasn't just protecting Jake, it was choosing to fight beside him. The bond was undeniable now. Jake wasn't just its protector, they were partners, allies, and the predator wasn't backing down. "That's it," Jake whispered to himself, feeling the weight of the decision settle over him. He had made his stand. The predator's growl intensified, and as the guards raised their weapons once more, it moved again, faster than Jake could react. But this time, instead of attacking, it rushed the door, breaking through the barricade with a single swipe of its claws. The guards shouted, trying to stop it, but the predator was unstoppable. It was free. "Jake, no," Eldritch shouted, but Jake was already moving. The predator was making its way down the hall, its massive form moving through the tight corridors with deadly precision. Jake followed, determined not to let it slip away. Jake's breath came in ragged gasps as he sprinted down the corridor, keeping a safe distance from the predator, which led the way with terrifying speed and confidence. The alarms had gone off, and now the entire campus was in lockdown, a state of emergency triggered by the predator's escape. But Jake wasn't concerned with that. He was focused on getting out, on surviving, and on making sure that the creature that had imprinted on him was given a chance to be free. The predator's massive form loomed ahead, its iridescent scales shimmering as it moved through the narrow hallways with the grace of a predator on the hunt. It was almost a living shadow, its claws clicking against the floor as it moved with an eerie silence. But Jake wasn't afraid. Not anymore. In the strange, chaotic bond they shared, he knew that the predator wouldn't harm him, and he wasn't going to leave it behind. The sounds of pursuit were getting closer. The security forces had mobilized quickly. Jake could hear their boots echoing on the concrete, the thudding of their armor as they scrambled to catch up. He needed to make it to the exit, now. But the path was narrowing and the predator was moving faster than he had anticipated. They turned a corner and Jake's heart sank. Ahead of them was another group of armed guards blocking the only exit. He had no idea how many there were, but he knew one thing for certain: there was no turning back. Jake, Eldritch's voice echoed down the hallway, and Jake's heart twisted. The professor had been chasing him for the past few minutes, but now it seemed like he was giving up. "You need to stop. It's too dangerous." Jake's heart pounded harder, but he kept running. He couldn't stop. He couldn't. The predator was right behind him, its steps heavy but steady. They were both in this together now. The guards ahead of them raised their weapons, but Jake didn't hesitate. He knew what he had to do. "Move," Jake shouted at the predator, his voice shaking with urgency. "We don't have much time." The predator responded instantly, its body surging forward with a speed that took Jake's breath away. It roared as it reached the first guard, knocking him aside with a swipe of its tail. The rest of the guards scrambled to respond, but the predator was already in motion, charging through them like a force of nature. Jake followed, his heart in his throat. He could see the chaos around him, the guards scrambling to regain control, but he wasn't stopping. He couldn't afford to. They were so close. He could see the doors now, their only escape. A shot rang out, and Jake felt a sharp pain in his side. He didn't stop, though. He couldn't. The predator was fighting through the guards, clearing the path, but it was clear they were all in danger. The security forces weren't about to give up without a fight. "Jake," Eldritch shouted again, his voice filled with panic. "You can't outrun this. They'll capture you." But Jake didn't listen. The predator was ahead now, its massive form moving faster than any of the guards could react to. It lashed out at one of the security mechs, sending it crashing into the wall with an explosion of sparks. The predator wasn't just protecting Jake anymore. It was fighting for freedom, for both of them. The hallway was filled with shouts, gunfire, and the sound of metal crashing against metal. Jake could barely hear himself think. All that mattered was reaching the exit. The predator was relentless, clearing the way as it moved toward the final set of doors. Just as they reached the entrance, another wave of guards appeared, cutting off their path. But this time, Jake wasn't going to let them get in his way. "We're getting out of here," Jake muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He glanced at the predator, which stood tall, its eyes locked on the guards ahead. It was waiting for him, waiting for Jake to make the next move. A gunshot echoed and Jake flinched, but it wasn't aimed at him. The predator's tail had already lashed out again, knocking the gun from the guard's hand. The creature was using its strength, its size, and its speed to clear the way. But it wasn't just the predator's raw power that was holding them back, it was the trust. The unspoken bond between them that had made this impossible choice a reality. Jake took a deep breath and ran forward, pushing past the remaining guards and the security mech blocking the door. The predator followed closely, its eyes locked on him, guiding him with every step. As they burst through the final set of doors, Jake felt a rush of relief flood over him. They were outside, free. The cold night air hit his skin and he gasped, finally feeling the weight of everything that had happened. His side ached from the wound he'd sustained, but it didn't matter. He was out. The predator was free. But freedom came at a cost. The sound of approaching vehicles was unmistakable. The academy had already called for reinforcements. If they didn't act fast, they would be surrounded. Jake didn't know how long they could keep running. He looked at the predator, which had already begun to circle, its tail high. It was calm now, but Jake could see the intensity in its eyes. They had made it this far, but there was still more to be done. "Come on," Jake said, trying to steady his breath. "We can't stop here." They were out of the compound, but the campus stretched out before them, vast and unforgiving. Jake didn't know where to go next, but he had made one promise: to protect the predator no matter what. He pushed forward, leading the way, as the predator moved in tandem with him. They were a team now, and nothing could stop them. They ran, the sound of their footsteps echoing into the night. Behind them, the academy's walls loomed like a silent reminder of everything they had left behind. Resolution. As the two of them disappeared into the night, the world seemed to hold its breath. Jake and the predator were free, at least for now. They had escaped, but the journey ahead would be even more dangerous. With enemies on their trail and questions about the nature of their bond still unanswered, there was no telling what the future would hold. But Jake knew one thing for sure: whatever came next, they would face it together.